from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. For you cow-calf producers, K-State's Sandy Johnson will talk about spring breeding management adjustments that you may need to make as a result of the unfavorable weather conditions the past few months. She discusses some different ideas on heat detection and getting cows to cycle early for natural service. Then excerpts from this week's Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. Brad White, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, and Dustin Pendell are joined by two special guests who talk about efforts to promote beef consumption to college students. Later, Britton Rucker will have results from the 2019 Kansas FFA Career Development Events competition, which just concluded here on the K-State campus, plus more, here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Thanks for listening in. This is our midweek edition of Agriculture Today. These next few minutes are for you cow-calf producers on spring breeding season management, and this taking from conditions coming out of the winter into early spring. And we're speaking once again with Research and Extension beef specialist Sandy Johnson. She's based in Colby, Northwest Kansas. Sandy, you step back and take a broad look at our cow herds and where they're situated currently. There are some worries about cow condition yet, are there not?
Yeah, as I talk to my colleagues throughout the state, it's been a long, tough winter on cows, and in some cases feed supplies have been stretched waiting for grass, and of course our grass is still slow coming on, and so really just a combination of things probably have our cows in little less than ideal condition going into breeding season. And of course, green grass can work wonders, but our challenge there is there has to be enough of it. And even if we're trying to still keep them on their regular diet, as they're starting to have access to, even in a dry lot, they're trying to chase weeds or whatever is there, and they're not really consuming as much as you might like them of their normal diet if it's, kind of old dry hay compared to something green. So we're kind of fighting that slow grass and what was kind of a long, hard winter.
And what this relates to is whether or not those cows are able to cycle in whatever might be deemed as a normal fashion, correct?
Right. Cows that are used to, essentially were developed in a nutrient-rich environment and have kind of been in that situation through most of their lifespan, they are probably going to need to have that better condition going to start cycling again. And so we know clearly that body condition at calving impacts when cows will resume cycling. I'm sure we have all range of conditions there, but then after calving, then if we have very much milk production in our cows, it's really difficult to feed those cows enough with that level of milk production. So if we've got high milk, or we have those cows kind of going backwards a while, so we have our green grass. So we need to certainly be in a positive energy balance in order to get cows to start cycling again. They've got to have some message that says, okay, there's actually enough nutrition here, we can think about making another calf. So the timing of that this year could be all over the board, and we need to be aware of what's going on in our cow herds. Now, with the long coats that are still on these cows, if you see that tail head rubbed off, you've got a good indicator that cow has been in heat. And so for this first cycle, when these cows have some hair, you kind of have a natural way to monitor that. And I guess I would encourage producers to, look at those tail heads intentionally, kind of count them up. If all the cows are cycling, roughly 5% of them would be in heat in one day. So you can look at that over several days and kind of get an estimate of what's going on.
In a recent article on this topic, Sandy, you added that if one would like to go about heat detection, get an idea of that cycling percentage another way, they can actually use detection aids that would be normally employed in AI programs for this purpose.
Right. We have some good tools, rub-off type of patch you can put on the tail head. If you're doing some vaccinations or working those cows prior to turnout, you can put one of those on when they're like a lottery scratch ticket, and when they're rubbed off, then they've been ridden and are in heat. If they're still there in July, you'll know that cow is having some challenges cycling. And so that can be instructive in and of itself, but as we might use it this year is, okay, how far behind are they? Mm-hmm. And if we are ready at our normal time to turn out bulls and there's just barely any cows cycling, are we better off to wait a week, try and get a little more green grass in them, than turning out at our normal time, and then we spend the first 2 or 3 weeks of calving season not doing much? There's some trade-offs there, but I would encourage people to think about if those cows are way behind by using one of these measurements, maybe you delay just a little bit.
If one has cows that aren't cycling, they could, in fact, go as far as to employ what we call as the cedar insert to encourage that cycling, and that might be something to give a thought to anyway, Sandy.
Right. We can induce non-cycling cows to cycle with a progestin, such as what's in the cedar device. Now, the thing you have to remember is they have to be close enough to starting on their own. Mm-hmm. We think of cows being in anestrus or not cycling as depths, and so right after calving, they're in very deep anestrus, and if they're very, very thin, they're in deep anestrus, and they're gradually going to come out of that. So I don't want people to think it can work miracles in all situations, but it certainly can induce a lot of those cows that are closed, and maybe I don't want to delay turning my bull out, but maybe I combine that with the cedar to try and induce some of those cows to cycle.
In this same article, you note that there is an economic value to getting cows to conceive as early as possible, and that number can be significant enough to make it worth one's while.
Yeah, and I just kind of put a dollar value of $21 per week. You got 2 pounds a day, 14 pounds at $1.50 makes this about $20 number, just to give you something to think about as you're weighing, is it worth it? And the older calves weigh more, and most of us are not marketing often enough to take advantage of, keeping that calf around for a few more weeks to sell him at a different weight.
On the sire side, can't ignore that, Sandy, and we've spoken with your colleague A.J. Tarpoff recently about the importance of conducting a breeding soundness exam on your bulls prior to turnout. There are some other things to address. If those cows are on the thin side and they're not responding right away in cycling, one might reconsider how long they're intending to leave those bulls out with the herd.
Right. What we know is that pregnant cows are usually worth more than open cows. Mm-hmm. And so while it pains me to say leave the bulls out longer, I'm happy with leaving the bulls out longer as long as you do an earlier preg check so that you don't extend your calving season. But particularly in a year where you're concerned about cows that are cycling, your options are leaving that bull out longer. But again, combine that with a pregnancy diagnosis that I would say is between 100 and 120 days after you turn the bull out, so you know what you have. And it could be that some of those really late cows, depending on what your season is, maybe they don't really fit anybody's spring calving herd, and you're better off pulling that bull out and making them into more of fall calving cows to market them that way. But again, it requires a timely pregnancy diagnosis to stage those pregnancies. Now, I know when people go to the sale barn and they stage cows all the way up till they're going to calve tomorrow, let me just share with you that it's extremely difficult to accurately stage pregnancies once they fall over the pelvic rim. And people make their best attempt at estimating those, and some people are better at it than others. But if you really want to stage those and know what you have, you need an earlier pregnancy diagnosis.
For the downside of a longer breeding period may be a longer calving period, and that can then translate into weaning weight declines and a whole myriad of things here. Right. And people oftentimes, they get in this situation with a longer breeding period, and they think that shortening that breeding season will reduce their overall pregnancy rate. And, there's a few data sets that would indicate that that's probably not the case. And if we get our management right, we actually increase our pregnancy rate, shortening that breeding season down. So there's multiple steps involved in that, and I'd certainly be happy to work with anybody that finds himself in this position of a long calving period and wants to work on shortening it, because we don't just do that overnight. We take some steps because there are some certainly financial concerns in how we market those animals that don't fit into our system. And you mentioned that you're willing to have a conversation with producers about these adjustments, because coming out of the adverse weather conditions of the winter and then early spring, putting a stress on cows and bulls for that matter, a producer needs to step back and take a second look at some of these otherwise routine things. You bet. And of course, our body condition scoring is something we talk about a lot, and having that repeated information can be a good tool to use in this process, and that would be where part of our discussion would start about trying to improve the current situation, is to be talking about and monitoring body condition. Well, producers, you can talk with Sandy at her office in Colby, 785-462-6281. Good input on all of this, Sandy. Many thanks for your time and your comments. Glad to be here. That's from Research and Extension Beef Specialist Sandy Johnson of K-State. And this is Agriculture Today. We'll be back shortly with more on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu. We're back with Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. Coming to you from the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University is another BCI Cattle Chat. Participating in this week's podcast are veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson. Also joining them is a livestock economist, Dustin Pendell, and cow-calf specialist, Bob Weaber, along with special guest Patti Dollarhide, dietitian at the Beef Cattle Institute, and Sharla Huseman, director of marketing for the Kansas Beef Council. Brad tells us here the topics they'll be focusing on this time around.
This episode of our Cattle Chat podcast is sponsored by the Kansas Beef Council. We've been working with them on a variety of projects, have done some different things, and especially Patti's our dietitian here at the Beef Cattle Institute and has worked with them on several projects, which we'll discuss today, because we want to talk some about a tour that they did for the dining hall food service folks. We also want to talk about an event which was called Beef Up Your Kansas Day. So we talked about what they did with the students and how they interacted and had some different things there. And I want to kind of lump a couple of these things together because you've done 2 events, and I want to talk about them at the same time. You did a dining event, and you did a tour for those dining hall folks here at K-State, and you did an event that was called Beef Up Kansas Day. So tell me first a little bit about the tour and what you learned from that process.
The tour was a result of just some questions that had come from our dining staff here at land-grant college, And we felt like we would like to showcase some of the things that we do at K-State on the ag side. So again, kind of peel the onion a little bit, open the door so that we can be a little more transparent with our own team.
So this is like the people that run the cafeterias and the dormitories and the residence halls here at K-State.
Correct. They are. They're managers. Some of them are PhD nutritionists. Some of them are food management folks. But again, they're in the food business. They have the responsibility to make decisions about what to feed our students. And we had heard that they had reduced some of their beef usage, and actually we did some studies and their beef consumption had gone down.
Right. How many meals a day does food service at K-State prepare? Do you have a guess? We got, 27,000 students. Not all of them, of course, are in dorms or residence hall, but...
We have a couple of really showcase places, and that's Kramer Dining, where they probably send 2,000 a day through there. Same with Derby's larger, probably 3,500, and then you've got Van Zyl, who they're probably serving about 800 a day. And anyway, so we heard that they were wanting to do the right thing on how they purchase their food. So we decided to open the doors to our research facilities and have some of our professionals talk to them. They got to meet our veterinarians. They talked about animal health. They talked to producers. We put some beef in their mouth. Sharla helped do a grass-finished versus grain-finished little study, and I think people were very interested and their chefs came to this event also, and we spent the day just being around the industry, and they got to ask questions of the people in the industry, see cattle up close and personal, and some of them, believe it or not, even in land-grant college, had not been that close, and they were a little, would you say intimidated, Dr. White? I don't know.
I think it was a good chance to interact, and as you guys said earlier, and as we were talking, it's a chance to engage and be able to ask questions in an environment where you feel safe to ask those questions because you've got that relationship. And I think having some of the things, and Sharla, as you did the demo of the grass-fed, grain-fed, it's nice we're not saying this is how it needs to be done, but we're providing some options and saying here are the different options, and there are multiple ways to approach this. But with everything, there's trade-offs. And how do we understand those trade-offs so we make the right decisions that match what we want to do? And I think that was a great experience for them. And then that led to this Burger Day.
Yes.
As you had the Beef Up Kansas Day. So tell me a little bit about that, because you guys really worked together on that one.
Right. I do want to say the two takeaways that we heard the loudest from the group, though, were things that the people in the beef industry would really take for granted. One was that they really enjoyed hearing that the producers get up in the middle of the night and take care of their cattle when they're calving. And that was kind of an aha to us, that was one of the things that was really important that they heard. And the other was the whole feed composition and how interesting it was that when they're in a feedlot, they don't just eat corn. And they got to participate in that. They put their picture on social media. And again, the things that you all and that we all take for granted became the things that were interesting.
Because they're used to making a meal for people with multiple components, but then as we put it in the hands of, here's what we do for the cattle in some of those environments, and Bob, you had them do that, and that was part of the process that they enjoyed.
Yeah, I was really surprised at, one, the engagement, right? So we had a whole bunch of feed ingredients out, and we kind of had them go through and identify, what the different components were. So, we had corn silage and triticale silage and steam flake corn and a couple of distillers or corn gluten feed products, salt, mineral, all the stuff. I mean, there was individuals in the group, not one person knew all the pieces, but they kind of figured out what was what, and then really kind of talking through how we feed and what we feed. They were really engaged and interactive through the whole process. It was great.
Charlotte, tell us a little bit about when you got the chance to come back and you participated with the students at the Kansas Day where we had different burgers. What was your perspective on that?
Right. We felt like landing on Kansas Day was just a perfect fit to highlight one of our state's most important products. And another great idea I think we put into play that night was asking representatives from the K-State Collegiate Cattlemen's Club and also the K-State Meat Science Association to come in and interact peer-to-peer with the students as they waited in line to get their food at the dining hall that night. They were able to ask of the students questions that they had about everything from production to what cattle eat, what does a day in the life of a rancher look like. So just all opportunities for us to continue that conversation with students.
And they enjoyed it. And Patti, you mentioned, got some good questions from classmates.
They did, and the classmates were surprised because most of the time they hang out with the ag kids while they're on campus. And I think that was, again, making that we're all real people. This is a product that's right here in Kansas. It has a story. It's not something that, is in a box that nobody knows the answer to. So I think that was really a good experience for both the ag students as well as the students in the dorm.
Which leads to, as we think about, and if I'm at home listening to this podcast or we're talking about some of the other areas, what are some of the action? Because it's easy for me to talk to people like me. It's hard for me to not talk to people that have, and when I say like me, in this sense, I mean same experiences, same background, understand what's going on with the industry. But if I want to talk to somebody else, it's a little bit harder. What are the actions that I can take to make a difference? If I'm a producer somewhere in the U.S. and I have cow-calf or feedlot or involved in the industry, what are the actions that you guys would recommend? And then I also want to hear from Bob and Dustin what your thoughts are.
I think even if you live in a city or in a rural area, there are still opportunities for us to tell our story. And that's something that I know is a hard thing to do a lot of times, but in a lot of even rural communities and larger communities, there are days at the ranch that schools do. So making yourself available to tell your story at those types of events, I think is a small, easy step to take to interact with younger kids as well as their parents alike.
It's easy to underestimate not everybody has, even in a rural community, has the ag background or exposure, because there are other careers and vocations that people are doing that they may drive past cattle every day, but they aren't really involved in it.
Well, one of the things that I think about is really saying what you said is the people that I interact with, sporting events or church or whatever, that just don't really know what I do or what other people in the cattle industry do, and just having that relationship with them and to bring up some of the things that we are doing, that be available for the questions that they're asking, be participating in those discussions. And I think that's something you can do. We just finished Easter, and so holidays, you've got family, you've got friends in, and a lot of times even family and friends have a different perspective and a different background, and being ready to really talk about that.
Yes, and I think I used to feel like I had to tell them everything I know, but what I'm learning is just kind of step back and maybe ask them a question or ask them if they have any questions, and you'll be surprised some of the things that they may be curious about.
Yeah, I think one of the other real valuable things is, being engaged in your community, and that can go a number of ways. I think one of the really important ways for producers, obviously, is be a member of, say, Kansas Livestock Association, your county cattlemen's group. Those groups collectively do a lot of programming and scheduled interactions with the public, or can. Other things, be involved in your Rotary Club or Lions Club or Kiwanis or any of those. And, at some point in time, there's going to be a speaker council at one of those meetings. Be ready to step up and go, you know what? I can talk about cattle production in Kansas and how important it is to our economy. Something like that that's really simple. You just need to be a little prepared, and don't be afraid to step out. And it doesn't have to be a complicated message. In fact, the really simple messages about, range production, caring for our livestock, the family component of our businesses all really resonate with our consumers and tell a great story about how we produce our product.
From the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University, that was Brad White, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Bob Weaber, along with special guests Patti Dollarhide and Sharla Huseman. Be sure to hear the entire podcast at beefcattleinsitute.org. When we come back, Eric will have the agricultural news headlines. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker, and we'll be back with more after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you, and with today's agricultural news segment. Starting with this, hundreds of Kansas FFA members gathered here on the K-State campus this week for the 2019 FFA Career Development Events in Agriculture. Those wrapped up yesterday afternoon, and Britton Rucker is back to provide this rundown of the results. Britton?
Eric, there are 16 contests in all, and here are your top placing chapters and individuals in each. In the Ag Communication CDE, your top chapter was Girard, followed by Labette County, and in third, Jefferson West. Your top individual was Taylor Brenz from Girard. In the Agricultural Sales CDE, your top chapter was Labette County, followed by Washburn Rural, and in third, Prairie View, with your top individual being Lindsay Gonzales from Washburn Rural. In the Agricultural Mechanics CDE, your top chapter was Phillipsburg, followed by Labette County, and in third, Prairie View, with your top individual being Alan Connor from Phillipsburg. In the Dairy Cattle Evaluation CDE, your top team was Norton, followed by Iola, and in third, Prairie View, with your top individual being Jonah Rudder from Norton. In the Entomology CDE, your top team was Stockton, followed by Ottawa, and in third, southeast of Saline, with your top individual being Nate Billinger from Stockton. In the Farm and Agribusiness Management CDE, your top chapter was Paola, followed by Spring Hill, and in third, Labette County, with your top individual being Taylor Brenz from Girard. In the Floriculture CDE, your top team was Spring Hill, followed by Lewisburg, and in third, Chapman. Your top individual in that event was Emma Roy from Lewisburg. In the Horse Evaluation CDE, your top placing team was Caney, and in second, Council Grove, followed by Shawnee Heights. Your top individual in that event was Samantha Kaza from Brewster. In the Meats Evaluation CDE, your top placing team was Pleasant Ridge, followed by Uniontown, and in third, Anderson County, with your top placing individual being Landon Trout from Scott City. In the Nursery and Landscape CDE, your top placing team was Lewisburg, followed by Ottawa, and in third, Labette County, with your top placing individual being Hallie Hutzel from Lewisburg. In the Poultry Evaluation CDE, your top placing team was Spring Hill, followed by Lewisburg, and in third, Riverton, with your top individual being Morgan Weinbold from Spring Hill. In the Veterinary Science CDE, your top placing team was Labette County, followed by Spring Hill, and in third, Holton, with your top individual being Paige Anderson from Lewisburg. In the Food Science and Technology CDE, your top placing chapter was Lewisburg, followed by Ottawa, and in third, Shilen, with your top individual being Granite Bach from Shilen. In the Dairy Food CDE, your top placing team was Marmaton Valley, followed by Lewisburg, and in third, Ottawa, with your top placing individual being Hannah Dahl from Marmaton Valley. In the Agronomy CDE, your top placing team was Washington County, followed by Skyline, and in third, Neodesha, with your top placing individual being Grace Otot from Washington County. And finally, in the Livestock Evaluation CDE, your top team was Uniontown, followed by Pleasant Ridge, and in third, Iola, with your top individual being Brody Nemechek from Iola. That's a quick summary of the top finishers from the 2019 Kansas FFA Career Development events that took place on the K-State campus earlier this week. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker. Back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Britton, and our congratulations to all of those who excelled at the Kansas FFA CDEs this week. Elsewhere in the headlines today, the Kansas legislature adjourned from the veto session during the early morning hours of this past Sunday, May the 5th. Todd Domer tells of two measures that gained approval before lawmakers went home.
Shortly after convening the veto session, the Kansas Senate unanimously approved a bill to allow all-terrain and utility vehicles to cross state and federal highways. Previously passed by a wide margin in the Kansas House, The bill also will allow ATVs and UTVs to be driven on state and federal highways as long as the highway has a speed limit of 65 miles per hour or slower, the operator has a valid driver's license, and the use is for agricultural purposes only. The ATV or UTV must be driven as near the right side of the road as practical. The bill now goes to the governor for her signature. If it goes into law, ATV and UTV operators would be expected to act in a responsible manner for safety purposes. Also during the veto session, the Kansas legislature approved a budget that contains $250,000 in funding for the second year of the Cattle Trace Disease Traceability Pilot Project. State funding for the project to be combined with continued funding from private sources. The 2-year project, currently in its first year, is testing an end-to-end traceability system beginning with cow-calf producers and ending at the processing plant. The Kansas model will help guide development of a cost-effective national program that can work at the speed of commerce. I'm Todd Domer.
And Chinese Vice Premier Liu He will be in Washington, D.C. tomorrow to continue trade negotiations, according to the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. Liu had previously been scheduled to lead a large delegation for at least 3 days of discussions aimed at concluding the draft agreement, the 2-day trip shorter than expected after President Trump's announcement that he would increase punitive tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese products from 10% up to 25%. New tariffs on the remainder of China's exports to the U.S. would take longer to implement beyond Friday's beginning date for lifting tariffs. Now, China is putting together its own list of goods that it will hit with additional tariffs if the U.S. follows through on its threat to hike tariffs on Chinese goods as of Friday. Bloomberg is reporting that the tariffs by China would become effective 1 minute after the U.S. in the event that the U.S. would up those tariffs to 25% on the $200 billion of Chinese goods. However, Chinese government agencies did not confirm that potential action. The U.S. would reconsider the decision on imposing those higher tariffs on China if the negotiations got back on track. Those are the words of Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. He added that negotiators had been optimistic in the past about the prospects and had been planning for that summit, but he said it became particularly clear over the weekend that the Chinese had moved negotiations substantially backward. Gus van der Hoeven and Stop, Look, and Listen, next on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
Listening and observing, you sense that for many people, it all is still part of their psyche.
That's Gus van der Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I know this is not Kansas. However, many Kansans were involved, not the least of which General Eisenhower, Ike, from Abilene. In the Netherlands, May 4th, is the National Day of Remembrance of all the war dead and those who suffered during World War II, and any conflict thereafter in which Dutch military were involved. But the first thought goes to World War II. I could follow the program on my computer with short videos and an hour-long program in Amsterdam, in front of the National War Memorial, attended by King Willem and Queen Maxima, and other dignitaries, as well as thousands of people standing in the cold, mindful of the occasion. There was the official wreath-laying. Among those remembered were the soldiers, airmen, seamen, merchant marines who took part in the shipping of war goods. There were wreaths for the people lost in the Holocaust, the Jews and the Romas. There was a wreath for those citizens who lost their lives by being in the wrong place at the wrong time, bombing, planes crashing down. Listening and observing, you sense that for many people, it all is still part of their psyche. They remember, we remember, I remember. The fact that our daughter was there standing with the thousands of people, and as she said, remembering her grandparents and us, having listened to the stories both my wife and I've shared, made it even more special. The wreath placed for the fallen resistance fighters was the moment you thought back to those you knew as a child, the stories shared later. And it is the stories which should be told, not of bravery or special deeds, but of the sacrifices made and the risk taken. At 8 o'clock in the evening there was the moment of silence. On the huge plaza, filled with all the thousands of people, it started with the bugle call. Then silence for 2 minutes. As my daughter wrote, the 2 minutes of silence was the most profound. Literally, the city stood still. You could hear the flapping of the birds flying overhead, but that was it. Not a cough, not a child, not a sound, but your own heartbeat, your own breath. And then, within those 2 minutes, it's amazing the magnitude of thought, my own thoughts and connection to this country, the Netherlands, to being here, to always the possibility that had a moment in your past gone differently, I wouldn't be here, swept through my mind. My gratitude for life. After the 2 minutes silence, not only in Amsterdam, where all movement stopped, the trains, the buses, not only there but over the whole country, cars pulled to the side, there is silence, remembrance. Then, after 2 minutes, the big bells start to clamor and spread their sounds across the country. Admittedly, the Netherlands is a small country, but it is an old country with much history. The tourists who participated were told the significance of this yearly event. Traveling across Kansas, I remember the airports where pilots were trained to fly airplanes. In my mind, I see the plane gliding in low east of Dutch City. I think of the young pilots who flew over the Netherlands to Germany. It didn't take them long to cross the North Sea, the Netherlands. The Netherlands is only one-sixth the size of Kansas. If you fly high enough, you can see both sides at the same time. However, it was a dangerous stretch to cross. I've seen many planes go down. So what do we remember? A Dutch friend of mine just finished writing a short book on the life of his American Indian friend, a Penobscot Indian, who served as a medic with the first troops going ashore early in the morning of June 6, 1944 at Normandy, Omaha Beach, France. He asked two young women what Omaha Beach meant to them. He knew the two young women and asked this simple question. The two looked at him and said, "What are you talking about?" "Never heard of Omaha Beach." Then one of the women said, "Oh, I get it. You're joking. Of course, Omaha in Nebraska all the way inland has no beaches. That's the joke." They laughed. Good joke of an old retired professor. My friend just turned and let the laughter fade. He had spent time and much research tracing the participation of the many American Indians in the war effort, but especially their participation and courage at Omaha Beach. Yes, there will be remembrance on June 6 this year, and there the remaining soldiers who took an active part, who jumped into the wave or dropped out of the sky, will be and should be remembered. But they should be remembered by all of us. Many did not make it to the shores or died on the beaches. Charles, our friend, pulled many ashore and treated the wounds of the wounded, but not all could he save. He's now well in his 90s. He remembers. Omaha Beach is no joke. What history do we teach our children?
Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University. Our time is away for today. As we part to bring to your attention one more time, you can catch our program via podcast by going to agtoday.net. Not only is each and every one of our broadcasts posted there, each day you can subscribe to the podcast service where the very latest episode of that program will automatically arrive on your mobile device every weekday. To look into that, again, go to agtoday.net. Meantime, we'll be right back here tomorrow and hope you'll rejoin us then. For Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson here, this has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.